according to at least the front page of the Daily Mail newspaper, we are a something-for-nothing nation. This is all basically a report by a think tank that says for the first time, more than half of people receive more from the government than they contribute in via tax. What do you think to this, Henry?
I mean, this is essentially, if you look at it, it's an artefact of having an ageing population. It's been coming down the tracks for a while. The fact is that more and more people are older, they're not working, and therefore, they're not paying taxes, because even the ones who are working are exempt from some taxes. And naturally, older people draw more heavily on the state in later life for healthcare and other reasons. Now, there are other contributing factors, such as the long-term sick and everything else, but that is if you're comparing us to Margaret Thatcher or Tony Blair's era, that is the single big change. Now, that has huge implications for the government, but it's not really a layabout issue. It's a structural problem of we have more older people, fewer workers, the economy is not as strong as it could be, and that's going to put strain on public services. Your
thoughts, John?
Another big factor is that we've effectively raised the school leaving age to 18, and we've also moved to a situation where nearly half of all young people go on to higher education in some form, either through a modern apprenticeship or through going to university or through advanced FE. The consequence of that is, people can spend up to 21, 22 years at the beginning of their life and then 20, 25 years at the end of their life not working and paying tax. They're contributing in all kinds of ways, and the higher your education, the more you contribute to productivity of the economy. So I think it's scaremongering, and the people who produce this report must have an agenda, and it seems that their agenda is the age-old agenda of the Tory right, which is, if in doubt, cut taxes. And this is to try to scare people to say we should need to cut taxes. We don't actually need to cut taxes. Last year they did this report, and it turned out, you know what? We're spending more on the health service because of COVID. So I think it's got one big problem in it, which is the article says the top 10% of taxpayers in the UK pay 53% of income tax. Well, that's quite low. In America, the top 10% of taxpayers pay 74% of income tax. So we're actually quite an undertaxed country. There's lots of room to increase taxes.
But you wouldn't advocate, you think there's lots of room to increase tax? I was going to say...
Well, there is. America's the land of the brave and the home of the free.
Yeah, but you don't live in America, you live in this country. So do you think they should raise the income tax in this country?
Well, there has been a period of massively raising income tax on workers like myself, workers like yourself, workers like Henry, to make us pay for going to work. And I think we need a fairer burden so that those who have wealth and a wider kind of range of wealth than simply income, they should pay more tax.
And Henry, you mentioned, older age people, I guess, but if you look at non-retired households, they actually paid an average of £41,000 and a bit more in taxes than they received in benefits. So they are people they're not the older people. We're not talking about your pensions, etc. We're talking about, I guess, your workers in that middle group. And you two have been very nice and you've been very polite and all the rest of it. But is there no part of you that worries that actually we do have a culture, and I would argue that it was made worse during COVID, when you paid everyone to sit on their backsides, basically. And now from there, you've got all this culture of let's all work from home. From there, you've got this culture of let's all work 4 days instead of 5 days and all the rest of it. Do you not worry that we are kind of changing from a grafting nation into one of if we can get benefits and do less, why not?
I mean, at the margins, that's probably the case. But I think if you're in certain instances, but if you're trying to argue from these figures, you simply have to break down the economic inactivity numbers, and the numbers speak for themselves. It is overwhelmingly people, at the start or at the end of life, and then you factor in the long-term sick. There's about several 100,000 short-term sick, which presumably will be because of NHS backlogs caused by the pandemic. There are all kinds of reasons, and I think that the challenge, I don't necessarily think it's scaremongering. I think that this actually is a big structural problem for the British economy, that you're trying to balance this very large state on a sort of smaller working age tax base, and that has long-term implications. But I think actually the challenge for the Tories is, if you want to crack down on these numbers, fine. But you have to, once you start explaining how you're going to do it, John talked about shifting the balance of the burden of tax away from workers. Fine. Well, that probably means shifting it more onto older people with wealth and assets. That's not something the Conservative Party, or indeed I think the Labour Party, are going to find an easy political sell.
And do you think there's perhaps an element of this, what John was saying, perhaps trying to push or lay the seeds, foundation for cutting taxes? Do you think there's an agenda like that there or not?
I mean, look, there's a certain the Conservative Party, or at least a big chunk of the Conservative Party, always wants to cut taxes and will want to cut taxes regardless. I don't necessarily think this report is about doing that, because it doesn't answer the structural problem, which is if you cut taxes on the narrower working age group that's currently generating most of the revenue, you still have to pay for that big state, right? You still have to pay for social care, you still have to pay for the NHS, you still have to pay for universal credit. So I think that the question is, how does a tax-cutting agenda get you to a point where the British state is more sustainable?